Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave McKernis, and as the chair of the Built Environment Committee, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, My Building Got Hacked. The digitalization of our buildings, cities, and pretty much every aspect of our lives have changed the way we live and experience the world around us. Its undeniable convenience and benefits are well known. But the flip side of this coin, the side of cyber attacks and the need for cybersecurity, is not as well understood. Here are just a few examples. In 2014, a hacker took control of 200 luxury hotel rooms in the St. Regis at Shenzhen after spotting a security flaw in his complimentary in-room iPad. With it, he was able to take full control of the lights, blinds, and air conditioning system throughout the entire hotel. In 2017, hackers penetrated a casino's network by accessing an internet-connected fish tank. The fish tank had sensors connected to a PC that regulated the temperature, food, and cleanliness of the tank. Pretty clever. But using this as an entry point, the hackers managed to access other parts of their network and stole over 10 gigabytes of sensitive and valuable data. Now, whilst these examples are pretty entertaining, there can be more dire consequences. In September this year, ransomware attackers disabled the computer system in Dusseldorf University Hospital, scrambling the data and making the computer system inoperable. This resulted in a woman who was scheduled to have life-saving treatment to be transferred to another hospital, a journey which she unfortunately didn't survive. Cybersecurity is massively important, and our buildings and connected smart cities make for very appealing targets, which is why I'm delighted to welcome you all to this webinar and introduce you to our three expert panelists. Joining us today, we have Daniel Yuan, Senior Program Manager, Digital Workplace for Microsoft, who is responsible for driving their digital workplace transformation in Asia. Along with Daniel, we have Ed Farrelly, Senior Vice President, Real Estate Industry Lead Asia at Marsh, who is responsible for coordinating, developing, and monitoring the Marsh Real Estate Industry Practice Plan. And joining them as our moderator is Magda Shelley, the chair of the ICT committee here at Britsham and Cyber Advisory Lead for Marsh Asia. Magda brings a huge wealth of expertise and experience to this discussion and has been nominated as a top 50 international cybersecurity influencer. Magda, over to you.
Good afternoon, Dave. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. We really appreciate you joining. This has been and is an absolutely exciting topic to be discussing today. My building got hacked. And it's definitely a topic that requires a little bit more attention. And as such, I'm joined by two very interesting and definitely expert in their field, Edward Farrelly and Daniel Yuan, to discuss a little bit further about how the industry is shifting and changing, as well as, of course, the impact of those changes towards cyber risk and the overall adoption of the technology. So we will have, I would say, a level of discussion where we start with this change with Edward talking about the direction that the industry is taking, followed by myself discussing about the cyber risk, and finalized by Daniel, where Daniel will actually give us practical examples of implementation of controls that are very important to keep the businesses afloat and resilient. Now, said that, I will start with asking our guests to introduce themselves with one word, just to make it a little bit more exciting. So, Edward, if I ask you to tell us one really interesting word about yourself, what would it be?
Oh, Magda, you've really put me on the spot there. Let's see. Can I say postman? Because I always deliver.
Fantastic, Ed. Thank you very much. That's good to know. Daniel, now over to you. If I ask you to introduce yourself with one word, what would it be?
I think I'm honored, excited, motivated, but I think, yeah, ultimately honored to be here.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. Fantastic. So, as I mentioned, their industry is changing. And therefore, the interest around cybersecurity, as well as the awareness, needs as well to follow that change. So if I ask you, Daniel, Edward, and eventually Dave, who we can see at the moment, but if you can tell me from 0 to 10, how do you think is today the cyber awareness of the real estate industry and their cyber readiness? Just show me, you know, make a you know, is it 1, is it 2, is it 3? What do you think?
I think it probably at 1, at the stage 1.
We all agree. Thank you so much. Definitely, we do believe that there is a need for the industry to actually take cybersecurity a little bit more seriously and have a little bit more understanding about why it's important. But as such, let's go and start with Edward providing a little bit more insights about what does the change mean for the real estate industry and how exactly it materialized for those companies. So Edward, please, over to you to understand a little bit more about the industry.
Okay, thank you, Magda, and thanks, Dave, before that. I was thinking of buying a fish tank. I don't think I will now after hearing Dave's intro. So I thought rather than just roll through a list of the tech applications that we see in real estate, I thought it'd be interesting if we take a walk through where we've come from, where we are, and what we see going forward. So let me just bring up, let me see if I can get the right presentation. Okay, I presume you can all see that okay? Right, okay, so I often say, you know, real estate, it's not rocket science. You know, it is pretty simple. And when we look at disruption in industries, which we're all used to in a number of industries, I think disruption has come late, in fact, to real estate. And disruption, a lot of the time, it's tech-led, and certainly within commercial real estate, yes, there are a lot of tech applications, but it's been late to the scene. I think residential has come before that. Of course, in the office sector, we've got co-working, and I know a number of co-working entities, they'll describe themselves as tech enterprises. Now, whether that's true or not is open to debate. But co-working, really, to be honest, it's just another way of repackaging a lease and shifting the risk from one company to another. So, you know, there is a tech element to it. But again, I think commercial real estate is a little bit late to the show. Interesting now with overcapacity in that sector, as real estate has taken a bit of a downturn like many other sectors, not only due to COVID, but I think there were cyclical effects which were already happening. But there is some overcapacity in that area. And companies, for example, Colliers, they've created an app which essentially will package up that capacity so someone can, you know, buy access and then be able to use these co-working entities wherever they are. So that's an app which has been rolled out, and just one example of what we're seeing. Real estate brokerage in general, I think certainly is a little bit behind the curve on the pure brokerage side. A lot of data is still kept close to the chest. Sharing among different entities doesn't really happen to a great extent. And in fact, I know of one landlord here in Hong Kong who prefers to use a fax when working on deals. So again, that just kind of gives you some insight into kind of, you know, where we are in certain parts of the business. However, prop tech has been rolled out in a number of areas: property management, for example, marketing, leasing. We will go in the presentation and some of the applications that are being used there, and ways which companies are using tech to engage with their employees and with their customers. Now, disruption, I mentioned on the residential market, which we have seen it. You know, residential, in Asia, it's a little bit different. Because residential is seen as a liquid asset in Asia, and real estate, generally speaking, is not liquid compared to other asset classes. But purchasers in Asia for residential, and also to a certain extent commercial assets, they look for capital appreciation rather than income return, which a European investor would look for. Markets are certainly driven by sentiment, which leads to greater volatility. Greater volatility then gives rise to a higher frequency of trading. So we get a lot of data churned up by the market. It's interesting in that some markets in Asia, house price indexes are constructed on a weekend basis. So you can get your weekend sales and whether they're up or down on the previous week. In a lot of other markets, for example, Europe, house price indexes are produced on a quarterly basis. So it gives you some insight into the frequency of the data. So obviously with this frequency, you know, that can be captured and used, which we'll look into. Now, looking at the US for a moment, again, in the US, the interesting thing here, that the professional fees that are generated off the back of these transactions. So compared to US stocks, residential is small fry. It's peanuts. You know, 40 trillion traded for stocks compared to 1.5 trillion only in US resi. But look at the fees, 75 billion for resi compared to 10 billion annually in stock. So there are a lot of professional fees out there. So given the high frequency of data generally in markets and the professional fees out there, you know, it would make sense to apply some tech solutions to tap into that. And we've seen that particularly in automated valuation models. Now, traditionally for an asset to be valued, someone will have to go along, a surveyor will go along, have a look at the asset, give an opinion, and that will take some time. Now, with all the data that we see in the market and how that is captured and analyzed, we see that desktop valuations being used. So they're automatically churned out. That can be used, for example, for mortgage applications. In a different way, we also see, for example, John Ford in Singapore is looking at using this for insurance valuations. So, for example, for a replacement cost on an asset, which of course is different from a real estate market valuations, but it's a similar approach. So again, what people are looking for here is cost efficiency and speed of action. So that's the driver behind this automated valuation models. Now, there has been some controversy about the application and the rollout of these. For example, in Singapore, there was a dispute last year between Street Sign and the Singapore Institute of Surveyors and Valuers about, you know, how this could be used, or really how does this measure up against a traditional valuation model. Now that dispute has been solved. I think it was about December last year. So, you know, this approach is being used in Singapore and is being used around Asia. And just one last point, you know, on real estate transactions. It's again a very traditional approach, and I'd be interested here. Maybe we can have a conversation later on about it, about the use of blockchain technology and why that hasn't really been rolled out. So a lot of these, whether it's been leasing or investment transactions, it's very, very much paper-based, does take quite a long time. So it would seem ripe to be exploited by blockchain technology. Hasn't happened a great deal yet. So again, maybe we can comment on what could happen there. Okay, well, let's look into retail. And in retail, I think this is really where big data, Internet of Things, tech applications is really being exploited. So for many, many years, we've had footfall in shopping centers, which has been analyzed. So when you walk into a mall, you'll see a little center above the door, which basically counts everybody going in and going out. Individual shops may have their own sensors to track where people are, where they're coming from, how they move around the shop. So we've had those for quite a long time, nothing new there. Catchment area analysis, again, trying to find out, you know, where people are coming from, what is their spend. So all very traditional. But mall owners now, they've really tapped into the applications of devices, sensors, as I said, big data, Internet of Things, to look at not only what people are doing when they're in their shopping center, but where do they go when they're not in the center? What do they do? When do they do it? How do they spend their time in the evening? And that gives really great data. So a shopping mall owner or manager can maybe alter their trade mix. So if they see that a high income catchment is going elsewhere for bars and restaurants, for example, well, that's a message that they can certainly act upon. Also, when we look at clicks and bricks and online shopping, the impact that has on high street retail and on malls and physical real estate now is becoming a lot more experience-based. So you may buy online, but you go into a shop for the experience and touch and feel. So again, there's a lot of insights which are being fed through to owners about what people are looking for and what drives their behavior. And again, tech is the platform behind all of that. Another thing which I think hasn't really been rolled out to a great extent, but we do see it in some areas and it will get bigger, is the applications for augmented reality. Now, there was a great advertisement by Burger King a couple of years ago where if you captured a shot of a rival's logo with the augmented reality app, and it would burn the rival logo, and you'd get a free Whopper for that. So again, that's one application. But also, what we see are applications which can be used, for example, to project augmented reality advertising onto high-rise buildings. Now, there's massive potential there, but there are also risk implications, obviously, as well, and insurance implications. So that's retail. I think, we don't have time today to go into all that's happening there, but it's a huge area for tech. On the office sector as well. Okay, so office sector, the tech elements here are tenant driven. So what are tenants looking for? Well, tenants use an office as a tool in the war on talent. So offices are used to attract and retain the best talent. What are employees looking for? Well, looking for safe buildings, sustainable buildings, and well-certified buildings. So on the right-hand side, I've just looked at the upper right, I've got the LEED certifications, on the bottom right, the WELL certification. So this is what employees are looking for, and that is being fed through into the development. And again, this is all tech enabled. There was about a year ago, I read an article about a new skyscraper that was going up in London. And within this building, there was a great use of advanced tech to optimize the building resources. And the landlord, through this, received 1 million data points every single day from the tech and the sensors that were in that building. So again, modern buildings, this is what tenants are looking for. They're the ones who pay the rents. That feeds through to the value of the building. They are looking for higher tech. Okay. So I'm conscious of time. I'm probably, Magda, you can give me a shout if I'm going over time, but I'm probably speaking for far too long. Often happens when I get on the subject of real estate. But just one example here of Bloomberg. So this was a building developed, a European headquarters in London in 2017. And through the use of tech and these advanced features, which I just mentioned, what they look to harness natural ventilation and use smart airflow by the use of sensors, and this delivers a saving of between 600 to 750 megawatt hours for them. It also delivers a 73% saving in water consumption, 35% saving in energy consumption and associated CO2 emissions. Just one point of which I thought of it is interesting, and again, when people talk about is the office dead or will offices continue, look at the tweet from Bloomberg. The interior of the building is designed to bring people together and encourage chance interactions. That's why offices will survive. The chance interactions, the spontaneous meetings that happens when you're in an office. So again, we won't go back to the way things were. There will be a certain balance in home working, but that's what people are looking for, and that's why offices will remain resilient. Okay, and a quick run through some of the things that I see within real estate, and kind of, at the very start, before a spade is put in the ground on a development, you got to look at the natural catastrophe exposure that's involved. So, you know, in the insurance industry, there's a lot of nat cat modeling that is being used. Portfolio analysis. I mentioned companies now looking to be more flexible, maybe introducing an element of co-working into portfolio. If they're spread across multiple buildings, throwing co-working into that, there's a lot to manage. So again, there are some very advanced analysis tools out there that companies rely on. Mobility, as people are working from home and working from maybe in different geographies, again, that needs to be managed. Lease administration. Now, lease administration, yes, there have been tools that have been around for a long time to collate, track, and manage the data. But as it becomes more complicated, we need tools that will give automatic reporting and alerts that will come up. Certainly when there are multiple lease expiries, alerts need to come up way in advance that will give sufficient time for negotiation. On the leasing front, again, I did mention the tenant mix analysis that can be done on the retail side. That's also applicable in the office sector. Then as people cannot travel these days, for example, someone looking to locate into a new office, they can't do a test fit. They can't go in and have a look at the premises. Well, now you can do 3D test fits. You can visualize it through VR, AR I had mentioned earlier. Investors who are looking to purchase an asset, they can't go and see it. Again, they can use these tools and others. And there's a tool that I think it was a JLL I've created an app where you send through a photo, just a photo of a random building, and then they'll send back and you get all the data behind that building. So again, you know, it facilitates an investment. Property management apps being used for tenant engagement. CBE already have an app, Host, which again, if you're an occupier in a building, all the services you have is at the touch of a button. And if, for example, you're in the city centre, you want to know with how the taxi rank queues are, you know, with this app, this will tell you the shortest queue that you can go to as well. And insurance responsibilities, you know, digital certificates for buildings, tenant insurance programs. No time, unfortunately, to go through in detail those, but we certainly can pick that up at a later point. Now, I'm conscious of time, so I'm trying to speed up, as you can probably tell. But just kind of wrapping up, you know, what a difference a year makes. So these are two articles from The Economist. You'll see the dates there. I think one is September 2019 and one September 2020. So from redesigning the corporate office, which spoke about the sustainability and the flexibility and the greater efficiency and productivity gains that are being brought about by the use of tech, to we're talking about, is the office finished? No, the office is not finished. And again, one of the reasons that I'd mentioned before, but it may seem counterintuitive, but as people go less to the office, there will be a greater demand for better tech in the offices to make it a place that people want to go to. So people can be more productive when they're actually there. So less time in the office, but better time spent there. So office certainly not finished, and tech is a major reason behind that. And then just to finish up, little privacy in the workplace in the future. I thought it was interesting, a couple of articles that I'd read recently, and one spoke about, there's a Silicon Valley firm, and they created these smart ID cards integrated and with information from emails and calendars, and that would create a picture of where people were during the day, who did they spend their time with, and so that could lead to, you know, a greater productivity. There was a Japanese company, and they've also created an algorithm, which, and I don't know how, but they will deduce mood levels from physical movement. And again, that is a part of it that app will be used to develop greater wellness in the workplace. And one final point, again, another anecdote, a number of years someone had told me about the sensors that would be put into a new building and under the desks. And so they decided to do this one weekend without telling any of the employees in the building. And what the sensors did was very simple. They would notify a system whether the desk was occupied or not. And through that, they could gain greater efficiency in the use of light, heat, etc. However, they didn't tell anyone. So Monday morning comes in, people sit down at a desk and the guy drops a pen on the floor and goes down to pick it up and sees the sensor just kind of blinking away. So says to the person you saw, hey, listen, they're monitoring us. So there was uproar about it. So again, communication and the human element is absolutely critical. So I'll leave it at that. I've probably gone way over time, so apologies for that. But yeah, so Magda, back to you.
Edward, this was fascinating. Thank you very much. Indeed, there are so many changes in the real estate industry, and depending on the usage, we're talking about retail, we're talking about residential, we're talking about offices, and they are all going through transformation. And this transformation is mainly led by technology adoption. And that's where, for me, from a cybersecurity perspective or the cyber risk visibility, it immediately raises, you know, the alerts. What are they doing around cyber and how do they ensure security and privacy? Because I do believe both are very much linked. So I also thought while you were presenting about really interesting questions that I think we will take the opportunity to discuss forward in the further, within the Q&A. And one of those questions relates to the valuation of the buildings. And as they adopt more technology, how do we include the risk that relates to cyber? But we will come back on that, and we'll definitely want to hear your insights on this. So again, thank you very much. That was very insightful. And now I will actually go through my point of view around, as I mentioned, cyber risk and the fact that I do believe that today we definitely have the requirement to raise further awareness about the cyber risk, and in general to understand that the moment that an industry adopts technology, there is an increase in cyber risk. Obviously, if technology comes in with additional, I would say, connectivity. And when we say connectivity to a network, we mean, or we actually can understand, that is an entry point for an external unauthorized party to the company's environment. But let me go a little bit further and share with you some of my slides about, you know, cyber risk and what do I think about cybersecurity for the real estate. First of all, in general, I do believe that we have the perception in general, the myth that cybersecurity is a complex topic and it's a technical topic. And I do think that as well, this is related to the fact that if we read any newspapers or Google something on cybersecurity, unfortunately, there are a lot of terms that might lack that simplicity and clarity from someone who is not in the field. So I will try to be really simple and especially bring and relate cybersecurity to the business. Now, as Ed mentioned, there is a big transformation when it comes to the real estate. And this transformation integrates and adopts new technologies. It can be the cloud, it can be blockchain, it can be any new technologies that help improve the environment, help to ensure that actually we answer to the tenants' requirements, that we make the smart building, and that we adopt a different way of, for example, building the work offices. Now, when we adopt a technology, we need to realize what this technology is bringing as new risks. To understand that, the first extremely important and critical fundamental concept is to focus on understanding what does cybersecurity mean. Very often, we believe that cybersecurity is a technical or an IT problem, where I see some of even, my friends or other peers will tell me that, oh, but this problem will be fixed by IT. Well, let me tell you and give you a very simple example. When you are using your social media platforms and profiles, you are using a technology that allows you to communicate with others. Now, that platform gives you the possibility to configure settings for your security and privacy, right? So those settings will not come up by default. They will require you to configure them as a user. That is a very good example of where you, as a user, again, has a responsibility to ensure the security and privacy of your own profile. Now, this is one example. Let me just tell you another one. When you receive an email that is a phishing email or an email that contains a malicious software, and you click on a link or you open an attachment, well, it's not the IT's responsibility or fault, right? You as a user clicked on that link or opened the attachment. So again, cybersecurity is basically ensuring that there are controls across people, process, and technology. And it's not at all only an IT problem. It's a balance between controls across those three pillars that allows companies to manage the cyber risk that especially increases when you adopt technologies. And today we can't imagine a world that is not based on technology. We are having a webinar over Zoom. We are doing business, working from homes, from different locations, using technologies and using connectivity over a network, which most of the time is the internet as well. Now, in this slide in particular, you see one line that mentions security breaches exploit people, process, and technologies. The two examples that I gave you relate to people, but in general, most common cyber attacks start by someone opening an attachment or clicking on a link, or someone making a mistake in certain configurations, or even further due diligence. But I will let Daniel talk about the due diligence of third parties and Internet of Things devices. And I believe that will be very exciting as well. So this is just to set up this scene and understand that cyber is not an IT problem. And it does apply as well for the real estate industry. It doesn't apply only for financial industries because, again, we have seen how big is the transformation nowadays for buildings in particular. Now, if we have a transformation for buildings, if we have a change in the housing industry, in the real estate, in the hospitality, we can talk about the concept of smart cities, smart buildings. And that actually concept means that you have an important increasing list of assets, which is part of the environment. Now, a first extremely important step when we talk about cyber and managing your cyber risk as a business stakeholder is to understand what do you have within your environment. What are your assets? And assets can be not only your computer, your network. Assets can be data, can be people as well. Now, when you have assets, again, that allows you to have the list of assets that allows you to have very good visibility, you can go to the next step. And the next step when it comes to building your cyber awareness is to understand what are the threats that my assets in my environment might be exposed to. And a threat doesn't mean or doesn't need to be only a malicious software. It might be as well theft from a disgruntled employee. It can be a software error. It can be just hardware failure. Imagine you are having your laptop and then you wake up one day, you open the laptop, it's dead. Happened to me. So this is basically a hardware failure. So having a visibility of assets, again, is a first stage. The second phase or stage is understanding the threats where the asset might be exposed to. When you have that understanding and visibility, now is also really important to understand a little bit further what is relevant for you as a business. Now, as an example, and also the misconception that we have is that, again, perhaps financial industries are the most interesting for cyber criminals. We are in real estate. They might not be interested by us because, what do they get? We are not storing a lot of information. Well, that statement represents two myths. First, that you are not a target. Everyone today is a target. And second, that you don't store information that is valuable for cyber criminal. As Edward mentioned in his presentation, what is really interesting is the amount of data that a building can collect, especially when we're talking about sensors, smart devices all over the buildings. And now, on top of that, we realize that cyber criminals can just be criminals using technology. As the building is going through a transformation with the technology, the same happens with cyber criminals. And they have access to tools and they have access to services that allow them to actually attack companies, attack targets by not having a very deep or in-depth technical knowledge. You can see here is what we call cybercrime as a service. So what does it mean? It means that you can buy, again, some services that allow cyber attack. And in this case, in particular, criminals can use the same and go through a digital transformation very quickly. So remember, it's not because you are not a financial industry, it's not because cyber criminals are only technical that, you know, cyber is not important for you. Those are myths. Everyone is a target, and especially criminals are as well able to perform cybercrime without the need of technical knowledge and skills. And of course, I will link as well another point before even starting into building a cyber awareness and strategy is that as you collect data, and I mentioned that before, mentioning again, when you collect data about individuals in the building, that might include personal data, their location, other information, like when we say, Edward mentioned about tracking people in a shopping mall. So how do you ensure that you keep that data as well compliant with the privacy laws and regulations? And the privacy laws and regulations are increasing tremendously, especially in Asia. So it's really important to understand that point as well. So if I recap, phase one, have a visibility of your assets. Phase two, understand your threats, and as well the requirement of having a link between privacy and security and the regulatory requirement for your business. Now, if we go to the next phase, basically it would be related to building the right controls across people, process, and technology to protect your assets from the threats and basically reduce your cyber risk. But before that, what you need to understand is how an attack can happen. So you have, let's say, your assets list, you have the threats, and how an attack can happen is the next step that will help you to understand your cyber risk and understand as well your exposures. This is a very interesting example, which I really like because it's not that traditional. In this particular example, the attack scenario is based on a hacker or cyber criminals who is using an IoT or Internet of Things device to get into the company's network. They are not just, attacking the computers, they are attacking the thermometer. And nowadays, all the buildings, they have those, IoT devices connected. We are talking about CCTV cameras that are monitored online. We're talking about thermometers, other sensors, and all those represent entry point for cyber criminals. So when you understand how an attack can happen, of course, this part, I tell you, this can be worked by someone who's technical, who can help you. So don't worry, I'm not asking you to understand how an attack can happen, but you need to ensure that you have someone who gives you that visibility. When you have that visibility, now you can start building and understanding your cyber risks. So doesn't mean when you have a cyber attack that you have a clear visibility of the cyber risk. No, you need to understand how and what are the cyber risks for you as a business. And that is only possible if you understand the threats, as I mentioned, you understand your exposures and vulnerabilities, and you understand your controls. When you do that, you will be able to have visibility about the available cyber risk for a business. Let's take an example of a smart building. You have a smart building, you have a lot of Internet of Things devices, and then one of the major, for example, risk for the business would be data theft, where actually it goes a little bit further in detail. You will have malicious data theft due to, let's say, a successful phishing attack. And this is a traditional risk, but this is an example of cyber risk. Let me give you another example, which is more interesting even. Business interruption due to a ransomware attack. And now I ask you, when you have those kind of two examples of risks, and especially data theft, because if you probably are regulated towards a privacy law and you might incur fines, as well as business interruption, which actually might lead to loss of revenue, or even better, which actually is very nice example, is imagine a smart hotel, and then the hotel is a victim of a ransomware attack, and then all the guests are unable to move in and out of their rooms, and all the systems are blocked. Because what is a ransomware? A ransomware is a malicious software that will encrypt the files of or the systems of the company. And then if you have again the visibility of this kind of risk, you are able to manage that risk accordingly to your risk appetite. So if I go back, phase one, have visibility of your assets. Phase two, try to understand your threats, have understanding of your regulatory requirement. Phase three, start to build your risk register, understand what does make sense for your business. Now, if you are a victim of a ransomware, you have that risk related to business interruption due to a successful ransomware attack. So how long are you happy to be offline? And this is an example of risk appetite. Are you happy to have your building blocked for 1 week and your guests locked in if it's a hotel and your guests locked in their rooms? Of course not. If you are an office, are you happy to have your systems as well completely unusable for several days? Probably not as well. So that's how you can start thinking about cyber risk and what to do to reduce that risk. Of course, when we're talking about cyber risk, what is very important to understand is that there is no 100% security. So I like to always say, if someone is marketing to you and telling you, I have a solution that will allow you 100% security, run. That's wrong. It doesn't exist. Like anything in life, 100% security doesn't exist. But what you can do as a business stakeholder, while you have the visibility of cyber risks, is to ensure that you mitigate and reduce that risk, or even transfer the residual risk with, for example, cyber insurance. So it's all come down to have that visibility and understanding that it also applies to you. Now, when you have that cyber risk identified, as I mentioned, you can decide what is adequate in terms of controls, people, process, and technology that makes sense to reduce and mitigate that risk to reach your risk appetite, or just basically to align with your risk appetite. Again, for example, if you have a cyber incident and that cyber incident relates to, let's say, business interruption for one employee during half an hour, well, you might say that's okay. If they click on something and their laptop is unusable for half an hour, I am totally fine with it because that doesn't impact extremely my business. So it's all about having that visibility. And when you have that visibility, your team, your technical team, your risk management team can help you with, especially in collaboration with the privacy team, to build the right strategy and ensure that you have the cyber risk treatment or mitigation as well as transferred deployed properly. Now, what is also very, and this is my last point, and then I give the opportunity for Daniel to share with us much more interesting practical as well examples, is that what has been as well very, I would say, unpopular or not popular before is that cyber risk, first of all, was considered IT problem, and second, companies did not translate the cyber risk to financial numbers or just numbers. And of course, if you have a business or you're working on your P&L and someone comes to you and tells you, oh, when you have a cyber attack, you might become you might lose a lot of funds. Well, if I don't have a number, that will not tell you anything, right? So cyber risk quantification is an exercise as well that can help you have that visibility. And when you have a cyber risk, for example, business interruption due to a cyber attack on an IoT device, I'm trying to change a little bit, you are able to understand how much money your business might be able to lose if that risk materializes. Now, again, as I mentioned, there are several points and several controls that needs to be put in place to ensure risk mitigation and risk treatment, and as well, as I mentioned, risk transfer. However, one of the really common mistake, and this is my, I would say, last point, is that we believe when we adopt new technologies like IoT, that they come on with security and privacy by default. I already said that it's not true. And I think the best is to understand a little bit more from Daniel. What does it mean and what and how your responsibility as an organization starts to ensure that you do the right things and manage that risk accordingly. And before I pass to Daniel, please do not hesitate to raise questions. We will have the time to have a discussion, but we definitely are able to have even a better exchange because we are in a smaller number. So please do not hesitate to send us in the chat your questions. Now, I hope you understood that everyone is a target and the cyber risk is not an IT problem. So I pass it to Daniel. Daniel, over to you to give us a little bit more practical examples of what you consider very relevant for businesses to do to mitigate and address the risk of third parties when it comes especially to IoT.
Sure. Thank you, Magda. I think it's my pleasure, right, to drill down a little bit of technical detail to talk about the IoT securities. So let me just bring up my slides. Is my slide showing up well? All right. I think, with Edward shared the trends and technologies in the real estate industry, and Magna covers the cybersecurities, the process, and the modelings. So what I would do is that I will do a little bit of technical talk, right? So as what Magna mentioned, right? Sometimes that, when we speak the technical jargons, right? So that is not easy to understand. I will try to minimize that as much as possible. So, I think with Dave and Magda shared a few examples that with a cyber attack, I just want to call out there's a few more examples here, right? The first one was in October 2016. There was roughly about 100,000 of IoT devices was taken over by hackers that turned into a botnet. So subsequently, the botnet was being used to launch a distributed denial of services attack. So as the effect of it, that actually take down the internet for the East Coast of United States for a day. And I think the second one was covered by Dave, that, the possible attack of make use of vulnerabilities in fish tank, in thermometers to gain access to the high roller database. And then in addition to that, there's more severe examples that was in 2017, right? There was threatened malware attacks safety systems at the industry facilities in the Middle East. It targets industry safety systems that monitors and secures valves, turbines, and then shut them down, right, if it determines that they are about to fail and cause explosions or other consequences that could cause damage to facilities or even harmful to people, right? So there are a lot of severe possible consequences that leading from the IoT security. And when the hackers are attacking the IoT infrastructures, right, there are multiple steps they're taking. So here, what I'm trying to share is so-called an IoT kill chain model. So this is basically projects how the hackers are taking the step-by-step approach of guiding the final I would say the gold mines that they were trying to acquire, which is ultimately the data or sensitive information, right? So normally as the first step, the attackers looking for the opportunities to gain access to your infrastructure. So for example, if the attacker knows that there are customer-facing kiosks that being deployed in a public area, these devices, if it is not being securely set up, right, that can be an easy target. Attacker could, make use of the vulnerabilities to exploit the weak credentials in those devices, and then subsequently they will be able to exploit these exposures to gain access to the public cloud infrastructure. And this can be done through a compromised user credentials, compromised IoT devices, and other misconfigured resources, in the whole cloud infrastructure. So without a security control in place, 68% of the breaches take months or longer to discover, right? And then in the third stage, attackers will discover what the resource they have access to and what are the scope they could access to. With the success attack, then they could gain further access possibly to the database and possibly other sensitive information. So the attackers can subsequently search for additional credentials to gain further access, right? So without the proper tools in place to quickly notify the user or us that the attack is happening, it will take organizations on average about 101 days to discover a breach, right? And meanwhile, it only takes attackers about 24 to 48 hours to be able to gain the full control of the entire network. And the final actions for the attacker could take is largely dependent on the resources they could gain access to at the previous stage. And then they could take actions that may cause data loss or make, for them to launch a subsequent attack. So at average, the financial impact of data loss now is reaching about 1.23 million, at the current stage. So what is, the top questions that in delivering or building smart building or IoT projects in your offices or in your building? So generally, these are the top 3 questions that commonly come across. First, is my IoT infrastructure being developed, deployed, and operate securely? Second, if I deployed IoT solutions, for example, smart lighting, right? Or for example, the space management solutions to measure the occupancies, or maybe used for social distancing purpose. So what are the security risks am I taking? Not only for myself, I mean, as of IT or facilities or, the real estate owners, but what are the risks for the rest of my business? Because those are the entry points for the attackers or hackers to gain further access into the corporate resources. And lastly, where can I get help, right? Conduct a risk assessments on my IoT infrastructure or on the solutions that I'm about to embarking on. So how would I know, right, if my IoT infrastructure is secure? It's possibly leading to evaluation strategies. First, that we need to consider the threats that are most relevant to our infrastructure, to our solutions, right? So for example, there could be information leak, could be system failures and physical attacks. And there are a few examples of physical attacks, for example, your sensors or devices being deployed outside of your premises can be stolen, or that can be replaced by untrusted devices. Secondly, that we need to identify the consequence, right, that are most important to our business, which can be loss of data, compromise of privacy, damage to brand, reputations, and potentially financial loss. So we said, right, we're able to drive into a selection of the possible evaluation strategies. So those appropriate evaluation strategies covers network traffic analysis, penetration test, threat modeling, authentication review, and further device risk analysis. And normally in a large scale of IoT implementations, especially in the high risk exposure areas, we may want to adopt all the tools of those, as the possible evaluation tools and strategies. So one of the very common statement, right, during my interactions with the solution suppliers is that they just give us a statement to say we passed the security test, right? So, oh, we are trust, we are certified. But that's commonly project a forced security image. The reason is that security is never a one-time effort, right? It is journey. It is journey required continuous and recurring assessments and remediations because there are more vulnerabilities surfaced. There are more issues can be identified on a day-to-day basis. So these are the few security considerations in each every stage of the decision making, but I'm not going to cover every step of those. But generally, the three key phases are planning, architecture decisions, and executions. There are commonly overlooked activities in deployment stage, which is the last stage in the executions. Those are first device provisioning, second device decommissioning. So it is very essential to manage the full device life cycles from the provisioning all the way to a proper decommissioning and the disposals. I think it's very common in a lot of organizations when they start engage into an IoT solution or smart building solutions, they has never considered how will my decommissions of those devices or disposal of those devices will happen. What are the policies and process associated with it? So now I'm moving into the next level of the details, right? Which is covers more from the project lifecycle point of view. So it is critical for organizations to set up policies, review process, and enforcements to ensure the security covers hardware, software, and network connectivities, all three elements associated with the IoT solutions. In most of the enterprise today, right, there are well-established policies and processes on software and network security because that was very traditional way of thinking that IT security, cyber security are IT problems. I know, of course, IT departments invested a lot of effort and energy in those tools process to manage software and network securities. And of course, the hardware will be well protected, right, in the server rooms, in the data centers. But nowadays, with the IoT exposure, the IoT hardware security is generally the missing piece in most of the overall security landscape, right? Sometimes that IoT hardware security involves both digital and physical securities. And as Magda mentioned, right? So people are at the center of the whole cybersecurity, and the same for the IoT securities. There are multiple roles involved in any of the IoT projects that normally we deployed or we involved. So first, we work with the hardware suppliers who produce IoT sensors and gateways. Second, there are solution developers who build the software applications that harvesting the IoT devices. And then we're going through the solution deployment vendors that helps us to connect the dot from both hardware and software, and as the result, deliver the full user experience and the full solutions to us. And lastly, the solution operators. So in most of the instance for the smart building implementations, the facilities management team or real estate team will be the team who operates those solutions, for example, smart lighting, for example, the space occupancies. The ultimate ownership lies with facilities management. But then the whole digital securities is a new paradigm to the facility operations team, right? Because they traditionally don't manage this type of operations. So give an example in the context of PoE smart lighting. So that is the lighting fixtures connecting to a network running on the power over Ethernet cables. And in such scenarios, repairing a lighting fixture, it is going to be a risk exposure to a network access, right? And the question is that should this activity be performed by electricians, which is normally does, right, under the facility operations. But now with the potential risk for the network exposure, should these activities to be conducted by an IT professional? So that's basically the ecosystems and the process changes that we need to manage around the humans, right? Especially in the security context. And of course, the culture associated with it. And this is a culture change that every individuals, every people who involve in those operations need to understand is no longer a simple or physical securities. There are digital securities for the facilities, and to the IT organizations, there are physical securities, right? Exposures to the IoT elements. And then I think lastly, I probably would like to share that the Azure IoT platform, right, which is built with the end-to-end security features in mind, that covers all the three key elements in the IoT security space. Firstly is the hardware. So that covers the device securities, including device provisioning, authorizations. And the second part is the whole network, right? So it covers the connectivity securities end-to-end. And finally, at the software piece, mostly residing on the cloud. Right, so that's a full range of the cloud security features and capabilities. So this offering is an overall suite as an end-to-end solutions. But of course, I want to call out is that, regardless of which solution approach you are interested, is fundamentally the policies, process, and the people around it is still the critical success factor for any of the such implementations. And we said, right, I will drill down a little bit further into the hardware security specifically, right? So because this is one of the common missing pieces into the IoT security space. So just to share with you, there are 7 factors to consider for a security assessments in IoT devices. But of course, you don't have to drill down to all the technical details. And I just want to call out a few of them. So the first one will be the hardware-based root of trust. So, I mean, this is the technical jargon. So what does that mean? So it means that a device must have a unique, unforgettable identity, and then that cannot be separate from the hardware. So this is very critical. I mean, one of the example is that a lot of network devices will have this MAC address, right? And that MAC address normally is burned in the firmware. So basically, the idea is that you cannot easily replace this hardware with an untrusted device because there is a unique identity and that is embedded into the hardware itself. A second one I want to call out, but of course it's not in the sequence on the slides, is the fifth one. It is the certificate-based authentication on a device. This is very commonly adopted in a kiosk being used in the public environments. The reason is that in those environments, the traditional authentications by using username, password as credential is no longer applicable, right? So that we need to deploy a digital certificate into the device as the form of authentication. So for all the subsequent communication to the cloud, to the backend, is transmitted with the digital certificate to ensure this is secure communications are coming from a trusted devices. And of course, this is a very common issues in the cloud-based security cameras, right? Because you probably have seen on the internet, there are a lot of security cameras, be it in office or at home, right, being exposed, right? That's the common issue is because it's using username and password. And a lot of people do not have the knowledge to change the default password, right? So that causes a lot of the privacy concern and the security risk exposures. And the final one I want to call out is really the renewable security. That is the second last on the slides. So this is the part that to make sure a device should have a capabilities of updating the firmware or software, depends on the type of devices that you probably consider to utilize. The reason is that, a continuous upgrade or update, it is the only way to ensure a better security because, as of any devices, security patching is something unavoidable because none of the hardware or none of the softwares are secure. It's only secure for now, right? Because that requires ongoing updates, right? If without such capabilities, you're going to have a high risk exposures. I think one of example is the smart TV, right? Because a lot of homes now having smart TVs, but generally none of the smart TVs will do security patch compared to your mobile, your laptop, because those are generally doing updates on a regular basis. And every update covers feature updates as well as the fundamental security patching. But it doesn't happen, a lot of IoT devices, be it smart TV, smart fridge, right? Those, potentially can be a security risk at home. But of course, when we talk about the business context, that will cause a lot of potential concerns, right, in a business environment. For example, the smart coffee machines, right, that can be potentially a penetration point. And even printers, right, on the network is a penetration point for a potential leak. Lastly, I think I probably covers quite a lot of technical aspects around the IoT securities, and in each every of the slides there are links to to offer more information on it. But of course, if you would like to learn further, there are a lot of links, and blogs and these slides that you can explore further. So with that, I'm handing back to Magna.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for the insightful presentation. There are several aspects here that I'm sure were interesting for the audience. And now probably they will need as well some help around implementing those, which actually, again, is a collaboration between different stakeholders within the business. Now, we have several questions, and I would say the first one, which is on the Q&A, it's very interesting. And I would like to start perhaps our Q&A with the questions that we received. And it is, what is the worst cyber attack you have seen? So what do you think, Daniel, Edward, who would like to take this example? Daniel, do you have any example to share with us?
Well, I think that I do encounter a few, but it's not something I could really share, right? The reason is that it's well known Microsoft is the #1 target for the hackers or attackers around the world, right? So we have a dedicated cybersecurity teams to help to protect our, our premises, digitally. But generally for us, that we are also learning along the journey, right? Because my role is really driving the implementations of the digital solutions in the office, in our buildings, right? So we encountered a lot of issues. I think one of the interesting part I can share is that when we work with our partners, right? Those are mainly Fortune 500 partners. I don't want to name who are they, but we do have a very stringent security review process on both hardware, software, and the network elements. And so far, I haven't seen any of the partners passing that security review, right, without any issues. And generally, it takes 6 months to 9 months for our partners to be able to remediate those issues are being identified. So that is really a common concern, especially in the smart building space.
That's very interesting indeed. You haven't seen a partner that came up clean. I would say it's the same feedback in my case when I have assessed, some cloud implementations and IoT implementation. There's just a lack of awareness of what is required. But from my side, I think what I have seen, which was the most scary cyber attack related to IoT, and it is a little bit different. So I'm not going to talk about an enterprise attack, but basically an individual, a user attack. There was a few months ago, maybe now up to 2 years even, there was a website that was streaming live CCTV footage from different houses in Singapore. And the reason why this was possible is because those individuals didn't secure their CCTVs, and therefore the cyber criminals and malicious individuals used that and then streamlined literally footage from bedrooms, from the kids' room, which was absolutely very, very scary. So what can happen with the lack of security consideration is, has different kind of perspective on a personal level, on the level of the company, on our partner ecosystem. So we just need to understand that is not only the traditional cyber attack where someone just targets a computer and try to attack the computer. There are various other scenarios. Edward, have you seen in your case, and being an expert around the industry, what do you think will be the future awareness of the industry about cyber? And do you think they are aware about those kind of attacks and the importance of cyber in general when adopting those IoT devices in particular?
Yeah, it's a good question, Magda. And I think the awareness, it kind of lags the implication, the implementation to a certain extent. And unfortunately, the awareness comes along when something happens. And we've seen that in the hospitality industry with hotels, for example, with data breaches. We've seen it in other industries with data breaches. So it kind of goes back to the question that you put at the start. What is the level of awareness like? And I don't think it's really high up the scale. And one of the things that I thought, just to bring in some of the comments that you had mentioned as well, is the human element in all of this. So when we're talking about awareness within an organization of cybercrime and the potential for that, we look to IT to solve all the problems. But again, it kind of permeates throughout the organization. And there's an HR element to it as well. There's the operational side about people and how people perform. And a lot of these breaches happen because of human error, and not necessarily because of the physical infrastructure, the hardware, the software. So I think awareness may not be there yet, but unfortunately, it comes along when something happens and we play catch up.
Yeah, I think, Edward, from my perspective as well, I think the awareness is lacking from both, the business stakeholders, but as well the people who are using the technologies, or basically consumers. And this is where I'm going to ask the next question raised as well, which is, people who work in offices and visit shopping malls may not be aware of their data and how it is being used or protected. Do you think buildings will soon be asked to show their cybersecurity readiness, and will people stay away from insecure properties? I think, Edward, I want to hear your opinion about that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I'd put another question there. It's, would you stay away from an airline that had a data breach? People have shown that no, they won't. They will still fly with that airline that had a data breach. So these things do happen. If there's a sign that someone is repeatedly negligent, a property owner, for example, well, that will damage confidence. It's the same way as if a property owner, we're talking here about consumers going into shopping malls, but by the very same token, we can talk about occupiers, tenants looking at office buildings. So if a building doesn't take care of, it's a building owner, doesn't take care of data, if there is a data breach, that will impact on the reputation of that building portfolio and that landlord. And tenants then will start to opt for other portfolios if that is the case. So that will impact on the rent that building can demand, and then through that will feed through to the valuation of a building. So it impacts on the value of an asset. So I think certainly with the use of data and in shopping malls and tracking systems, et cetera, at the end of the day, we all sign up for this. And, whether it's, included in the small print, yes, it will have to be. But, when we opt into the free Wi-Fi in the shopping mall, data is used, but they must tell you what they're going to use it for. Or we download certain applications and then they know where you are at certain times of day. And although the information may be anonymous, at the end of the day, we do sign up to things because they give us something in return. So, it's a little bit of a quid pro quo there.
And we give something in return as well. If we don't pay for it, it's not free. We are the product. Just to add from a security perspective, yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But Daniel, thank you, Edward. Daniel, this makes me think about an aspect that you mentioned, which is that you review your partner's security. You ask them to show what they are doing. So if we're talking about, being able to show the cybersecurity readiness and I would say, the minimum standards that they have implemented as vendors, partners. I think you can give us your perspective about that because you're working in an ecosystem. And what are the implications of those partners not being able to align with the minimum security standards that you request them to have?
Okay, sure. So for us, that first, this assessments and the evaluations approach is not really a selection criteria. The reason is that we are still going through the traditional procurement selection criteria, right? The reason is that there are still the business value versus the cost. Those are still important, but the security and the privacy reviews is mainly the method to help the partners to be able to meet those standards. So the reason we are conducting those assessments, including the hardware, for example, we request at least 3 samples for every specific models to be shipped to our lab. We can conduct the full assessment, right? And through that process, we will produce a report. And this report will identify critical, high, medium, and low security risk. And then we will work with the partners to firstly identify the solutions that can be a short-term remediation solutions that probably doesn't require hardware change or application change. That can be a procedure change, right, to secure it. Right? For example, add a physical seal, or maybe just lock the device in a physically secured compartments, right? So there are ways to mediate the security risk, but not necessarily technically, right? So once those are done, then we work out on in terms of long-term remediation activities. Right? So when we will be able to produce a new version of hardware, a new version of software that will perform better, right? So with that, then we are reaching to a stage that we are comfortable with that deployments, so that we allow those devices to be entered into our premises for a production environment setup.
But would you say, Daniel, that in the future there will be probably a choice criteria or selection criteria like in the traditional vendor management? I mean, if we look at certain third-party assessments and vendor management, if the vendor doesn't pass security assessment, then they are actually rejected. Do you see that becoming as part of this industry as well, in general consideration for a selection of business partners?
Well, it's highly possible, but our approach is that we generally would like to do a whitelisting of the devices, but not the partners. The reason is that in the IoT space, the technology evolvement is very fast. So even in 6 months' time, there's totally different technologies, a new device coming out, right? So it's always a catch-up game by doing security reviews, right? So, and it probably doesn't make sense to rule out any potential new partners or suppliers that we could work with, right? So, and especially we want to be supplier agnostics or device agnostics, right? Especially one of the reason in IoT space, there are regional players, right? So a lot of suppliers only operate in America or in Asia, or some of them, for example, operate in India, and some of them operate specifically in China, right? So it will be very hard to have a global single source suppliers. So we have to work with multiple suppliers. That's why the policies process and of course the mindset change and the cultural understanding of it is become very important. So we do those constant communications in the communities, including real estate and the facilities team, to make sure they understand this is the approach to be taken.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So we are actually running out of time. So just as a summary, before I give back the opportunity for Dave for his closing remarks, thank you very much, Daniel and Edward, for the insights and for the very interesting discussion. I think we saw how the industry is changing, adopting technology. We discussed about cyber risk management and how it is and why it is important for companies to understand that they are a target no matter of the industry, and what does a cyber risk mean for a company. And we ended up with having a very clear, detailed, practical example of how to manage IoT security from the point of view of hardware, software, and network connectivity, which again, you can understand those concepts on a high level and then ask your teams or technical teams and as well relevant teams to work with you to address it. now. So again, thank you very much. I will let Dave take over back for his closing remarks.
Thanks very much, Magda. And to Magda, Edward, and Daniel for these excellent presentations, thank you so much for your time. I am sorry we did run a little bit out of time, so if there are any other questions from the audience that we couldn't cover, I'm sure you can reach out to Magda, Daniel, and Ed, who would be happy to share a bit more as well. You know, as real estate professionals, I think we've welcomed the influx of technology into our industry. We've used it to delight our customers and to support our businesses. And I think for me, this was a fantastic reminder that we also have to ensure that we bring cybersecurity, you know, the experts and the job functions into our organizations as well to protect our assets, but also to echo what Ed was mentioning. We have the obligation to safeguard the data and the privacy of our tenants in our buildings and the users that are coming into our built environment. So thank you very much to all of our panelists and Magda for moderating the session. For all of you who joined us, it's been an absolute pleasure having you with us this afternoon. And please look out for more webinars and events coming your way, some of which we can put on the screen and many more that can be found on the BritSham website. And finally, you will be receiving a mail in your inbox. So we have your data, so we'll be using that to send you an email, but just one, don't worry, asking for your feedback for today's event. So it'd be great if you could spare a few minutes and fill that in for us. And with that, thank you to all. Thank you to our panelists. Stay safe, and we hope to see you again at future events. Cheers.